Well, let's go ahead and we're ready to get started. Are you ready, Richard? Got us going? All right, Deuteronomy 20, verse 16 to 18. Let's open up there first. We're going to get us started at this point. We're just doing a little bit of review as we are working our way into where we are at. Deuteronomy 20, verse 16 through 18 is really the Lord telling them what they are to do when they get into the land of Canaan. When they get into the land of Canaan. Just kind of give a straight out statement here. Let me actually read it for you. It says, but of the cities, verse 16, but of the cities and of these people which the Lord thy God doth give thee for an inheritance, thou shalt save alive, what's the next thing? Nothing that breatheth. But thou shalt utterly destroy them, namely the Hittites, and the Amorites, the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord thy God hath commanded thee. And they shall that they teach you not to do after their abominations, which they have done unto their gods, so should ye sin against the Lord your God. What's the reason why God is saying you are to spare them not? So they don't influence you, basically. That's mainly the reason why you are not to let them hang around. Yes, sir. Deuteronomy 20, 16 to 18. Deuteronomy 20, 16 to 18. So that's the reason. And besides that, let me just kind of throw this thought in there. There's also a sense of judgment happening upon them. If you go back into the Old Testament, well, I guess we are in the Old Testament, back in Genesis, where God made promise about the children of Israel taking the land of Canaan, He said it would be until the fourth generation. And it's sort of a way of saying, I'm giving them time. And then He said, until the iniquity is full, or till the cup of their iniquity is full, that He was giving them 400 years, really, of time to get right with Him. And if they don't, it's just going to keep filling up iniquity till it comes a point where God is ready to pour out His wrath. And that just gives you time to gives us an illustration of, you think, why does not God judge our nation in fullness like that yet? Because we do some of the very same things. If you go and study out what the Canaanites did, what the people of Canaan did, it were horrible things. Let me give you a couple examples. Child sacrifice was a big one. Other things, they would dedicate servants in a wall, basically as a way of a sacrifice to their God. When they built a house, they would build it on top of somebody. Just horrible kinds of things like that. Child abuse, sodomy, all these kinds of things that we somewhat see happening in our own country. And that was going on during the days of Abraham. And God said, I'm giving them 400 years. And then when it's time to be done, you guys are going to be the instrument by which I judge the nations of Canaan. And that's exactly how God uses Israel. And He also warned them that I will do the same to you if you do after their abominations. And that's exactly what He did. He used another foreign nation to come after them. And that we all know about that. I mean, you read it in the book of Judges, you have that happening over and over and over. And then you have it happening finally to the northern kingdom, and then the southern kingdom, you have it happening for 70 years. So, where they are taken away in captivity. So we do see this kind of a way God works among the nations. God does this all the time, doesn't He? Just go look throughout human history how there's really not ever been one nation that has been continual from the very beginning of time. It's always rise, fall, rise, fall. And they might go on for hundreds of years. They might even go on for thousands of years, some of them. But eventually they fall. And this is kind of the way God continually works among nations. Now, some of them might have some of the same names way back then, but they have fallen, and a new group of people have taken over. And that's just continually happened that way as well. Okay? So I just want you to understand that. That's what we are dealing with when we come to what's called the conquest of Canaan. God is judging Canaan And also, God is preserving His own people so that when they go into the land, they don't repeat the same kind of behavior that those people were doing. Now, if we recall what God told the men who conquered Jericho to avoid doing. Anybody remember that? When they came in, the first city they conquered? What would they avoid doing when they came in to conquer? He called it what? The accursed thing. The accursed thing. Why? Because it's cursed of God. In fact, it was so cursed that God even made a pronouncement, they will not rebuild this city. You decide you want to start rebuilding, it'll bring curse upon you. Why don't you leave those there for me? Just don't mess with them right now. Thanks. So yeah, that's something we're supposed to do. Now, if we go to Joshua chapter 7, we're going to see where Israel actually didn't obey that command. We saw the success of Jericho, but somebody didn't obey and took of the accursed thing. All right, so look at verse number 1, and we're going to read down through 26. So if I can get some people who will read 1 to 5, 1 to 5, Joshua 7, 1 to 5, 6 to 10, Bill, 11 to 15, Wayne, 16 to 20, Darla, 21 to 25, Carlotta. Actually, Carlotta, you want to do 26 too? Give you one extra verse to read? Okay. 21 to 26 for Carlotta of chapter 7 of Joshua. Everybody got where they're at? Okay. Go start us off, whoever was the first one. Was that you, Bill, or Fred? Okay. Yeah. Go ahead. To Ai. Okay. Okay, hold on a second. Did you see a word there that he had in there that might be a little confusing? The word environ. What does environ mean? No, not environment. It means surround. These are older words that we don't use very often, but that's what the word means, surround. Okay, go ahead. Verse 11 to 15. Okay, 16 to 20. Okay. Okay, so let's review the text here. According to the very beginning, who committed the trespass? I don't want specific name, I want general name, because there's a general one. The children of Israel. And by the way, that's how you're going to see God referring it to. Now, he'll specifically say one did, but he doesn't even tell Joshua who this one is. He blames the entire nation. Now, isn't that something? We ever think about, we talk about when sin gets into the church, it's not just the one person that's at fault now. The entire church begins to pay for it. You understand that? And it's the responsibility of the entire church to get it out, just as we see happening here. Okay? Now, who specifically took it? Huh? Achan. Achan, because he's going to be Achan soon. How does Achan represent the people of Israel then? Kind of already said it, but how does he represent the people of Israel? Yeah, he is of the tribe of Judah, but how does he represent all the people? All of them got the curse because of what he did. All of them began to face that judgment, and all because of one man's act of disobedience. By the way, that's still true today for all of humanity, isn't it? The Bible says, "For by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and death is passed upon all men." We're all under the same bondage because of one act of disobedience by one man, Adam. This is how God works when He comes to dealing with sin. Now, does that mean that everybody has to pay for everybody's sin? No. But being part of a group that's allowing those kinds of things in, you will fall with the group when the group begins to suffer. Do you understand that? It happens that way in nations. When nations do what's wrong and they begin to suffer the consequences for it, you may never have done a single thing wrong, but you suffer with them. Right? And that's exactly what's happening with this little nation, or, well, it's a little nation, 2 million plus people nation. Okay?
It's guilt by association.
It's not guilt by association, it's consequence that you face for the whole nation. for one man's sin. You're not guilty necessarily personally, but you face the consequence that everybody else is going to face because of that one sin. So let's go a little bit further here. What did the spies report about Ai? Let's get to this next little town. Weren't very many. And what did they suggest to Joshua to do? 2 or 3, that'll be fine. We don't need to send our full army, right? Easy victory. By the way, here's another problem. Joshua, you don't ever see Joshua at this point asking God's leadership on what to do here. God just says, oh, he just kind of lets him go do what he's going to do. Up to this point, he has followed the command of the angel of the Lord, right? We saw that with Jericho. Walk around the city once, walk around the city once, and do that 6 days, and the 7th day, walk around 7 times, shout, trumpets are going to be blown, wall's going to come down, then you're ready to take them out. He gave all the instructions on how to do it. There's none of that. It's sort of like this overconfidence already starting to happen. That, hey, we're big enough, these guys are small. There's not even a consideration of what does God think we should do here.
When you're saying that, I just had a thought. Do you think that had he prayed to the Lord the way we do now, we have such a close relationship, God might have told him you've got sin in the camp?
He probably would have. I would imagine he probably would have. Have told him that there's something that you need to deal with before we go to the next battle. Yeah. Before they went off and destroyed themselves. Now, children, why don't you get your stuff off your dad's back so you're not causing trouble there for him. Thank you. All right. All right, so how does the battle turn out? They lost. It said they fled before Ai, and how many people died of their camp? 36. So, well, that's not that bad. They got 2 million. There shouldn't have been any if God was fighting for them, right? So this defeat is surprising. Why is it surprising? Obviously, it appears that God is no longer with them. They lost. I mean, they won. So they won against this gigantic, double-walled city with no trouble at all. Now they can't even handle a little tiny city. And they're going, what in the world? God, you've pulled away from us. Why are you not fighting with us? And so then Joshua and the elders, what do when they see the news of this, or they receive what's happened here? What do? How do they respond? Rent their clothes. What's rent their clothes mean? Tear their clothes. Then what else it said they did? Fell on their faces. And then what else? One more. Threw dust on their head. And that was a kind of a cultural way, and it's sort of, you see that in the Middle Eastern culture of that time where they did it all around. But that was sort of the cultural way to show their grief and their outward sign of repentance. That what have we done wrong? Is there something we've done wrong? Or even when they know they've done wrong, and this is how they would respond. If you're with us on Thursday nights, you'll see that Mordecai will do that. It's similar. He's going to do something similar like that that we'll come to, where he falls on his face in dust and sackcloth and ashes, and does this kind of a mourning type of thing as well. So it's an outward sign. And he doesn't, where does he fall before? The Ark of the Covenant. Why before the Ark of the Covenant? Yeah, it's a symbolic place where God dwells. It's a way of saying, hey, I need to go talk to God. This is where He communicates from. God, please help me know what's going on here. So what was Joshua's concern that he expresses to God here at this point? Yeah, if you were going to let us come in here and abandon us, why didn't you just leave us on the other side? That was sort of the way he said. And there's an underlying expression that he's concerned about whose glory? God's. He's concerned about God's glory and his name being dragged through the dirt because he wasn't able to do what he said he would do. And the Amorites are going to come and destroy us here in the land, and you are going to be the one that's shamed for it. And that's a very realistic. I mean, what do you think? How do you think people think about a church that has some horrible act happen in it that's in the church? And people on the outside see it. What do they begin to think about the God of that church? Yeah, they say, if that's what God is all about, I don't want anything to do with that, right? That's kind of the attitude here, okay? That's the concern, okay? So what does God identify as the source of why they were defeated? Specifically, though. Someone took the accursed thing, the thing I told them not to take. And he also said they broke my covenant. Anybody know what the covenant is? No, covenant is an agreement between Israel and God. What covenant do we know that they did? Remember what the covenant was? All the commandments that they said, as you have said, we will do. And now they're not doing. And one has obviously, as we're going to see, coveted. That was a breaking of one of the commandments. Basically committed some type of an idolatry in action. Stole. That's the 8th commandment. Broke. So, I mean, we kind of keep going on there. This is the attitude. And he said, you have broken my covenant. That's why you are facing my curse. You took the accursed thing. Well, he's like, you should have got this resolved before. Yeah, it was showing God's anger. Get off your face. You don't need to be talking to me. Yeah, that's kind of God's anger. Have you ever had to do that with your kids? Where you were irritated enough to say, I don't need to hear that. Get off your face. Yeah. Joshua wasn't aware, but you know what? It's almost, I get the idea that maybe God was saying, maybe you should have asked me before you went off into battle with your own plans. And you would have found out there's some problems that need to be resolved. But you didn't. You just kind of assumed you're the leader and it'll work out your way. Kind of attitude. Now, I'm reading into that, but I think that might be part of the spirit of what's going on here. All right, so now we get to where he's going to begin to sift out who this person is. And how does he go about the process? Starts with the tribe, then takes family, a whole family out of all these families, out of all the families of the tribe, then takes individual families out of that one family, then he takes the head of that one family. And who do we find it out to be? Achan. Verse number 19, I want you to, someone read that verse out loud for us. I want you to hear what it is that Joshua says to Achan. And see if we can define what this is.
My son, give, I pray thee, glory to the Lord, God of Israel, and make confession unto him, and tell me now that thou hast done, hide it not from me.
Okay, so what does he mean by give glory to God? Okay, so opportunity to praise God. Is this really opportunity to praise God? Let me give you an example or explain what's about to happen. If you already know the account, Achan's going to die. And some of his children are going to die with him. Not all of everybody's going to die. Achan and his children die. And this whole idea of give glory to God is a way of saying you need to admit your guilt, that you deserve this, and take that off of God's back. As though some God is just this heartless, could care less, and he's mean, and you didn't deserve what you got from God. Do you get that? you're going to reflect that he deserves to be your judge, and you deserve to be judged. And then he says, and make confession publicly. You know, that's really important, isn't it? Because even Joshua might know, and maybe a couple of the elders might know that Achan's guilty, but the rest of the nation may not know. And they may be going, why are you doing this? It's important that Achan testifies publicly that he's guilty. Right? And he's going to have to come clean on what he's done. So, what did he do? He took goodly Babylonish garbage, okay? And a wedge of gold. Where did he find that out of? In Jericho. Now, did you notice how it says it? How he refers to what he did? Verse number 21. It says, when I saw among the spoils a goodly Babylonish garment, 200 shekels of silver, a wedge of gold, 50 shekels weight, then I coveted and took them. There's kind of a three-step process. I saw, I coveted, I took. Does that remind you of anybody in the past that had a I saw, I coveted, I took? No, in the past we've looked at so far. Eve. She looked upon the tree and saw that it was good for food. And she coveted it because it would make her wise, and she took it. And she ate it. Right? There's that process. By the way, that's really how sin works anyways, isn't it? Sin usually starts here. Actually starts here. But it usually works its way through this place right here, the eye gate. And then it goes, hey, you want that. And you begin to want what you know you're not supposed to have. That's what coveting really is, right? Wanting what you're not supposed to have. And then coveting always most oftentimes leads to taking it, behaving the way you're coveting, right? That's why God in the Ten Commandments actually makes the point that don't covet, because if you don't covet, you won't do any of the other problems. You won't do any of the other sins, really. If you don't covet another man's wife, you won't commit adultery, right? If you don't covet somebody else's gold, you won't be a thief. You know, you kind of get the point. If you don't let these wrong things happen in your heart, those other things won't happen. So that's why there's a point to guard your heart when it comes to obeying God. All right. Well, that's not the point of the text here, so let's go on. So what, after he explains his sin, who else gets punished according to the text? His children. Did you notice his wife is not mentioned? Now, we don't know if a wife was there or not, but it's his children are punished. Now, hold on for a second. Go back and hold your place there. Go back and look at Deuteronomy 24, verse 16. I need someone to read that one for me real loud so everybody else can hear it. Deuteronomy 24, 16. So what does that tell us? His kids were involved in it. So this was not just one man's sin, was it? Achan gets the name title for the problem, but the entire family of Achan, at least children-wise, were just as much guilty. And they were also given the same command. Don't take. Huh? Well, that was just the entire family. Get rid of the remembrance of them all now. What do they do with them? They first stone them, and then they burn them, and then what do they do on top of that? They make a huge pile on top of that. Yeah, so here's the idea. It was meant to be a memorial. When you look back at that heap, don't you disobey God again. Now, some of us probably, maybe even here, might feel pretty uncomfortable to hear God saying these kinds of things. Or especially if you're outside of our church and you got people that just kind of have this let anybody do what they want, they have the freedom to do what they want kind of attitude, hearing about God demanding this kind of behavior or this kind of loyalty to the point that if you don't obey, you deserve to die like this, might feel extremely uncomfortable. What does this tell us about God? He should be feared. We've gotten, I think, most of the time in our culture, this kind of attitude toward God where we don't fear Him at all. We demand our rights, we demand what we want, we just do our thing, and we just kind of expect Him to overlook anything. But He hasn't changed. He's still that God. Go into the New Testament and we see Him do the same thing again. Anybody remember an account where He took a husband and a wife out in the church service? Remember Ananias and Sapphira? And it wasn't because they stole, it was simply because they lied. And it says, and the rest of the church feared God because of that. And it says, and nobody joined themselves to them anymore. Well, at least not in this flippant way. Like we don't really fear this God. He is meant to be feared. And that's exactly what He's setting up, almost right at the very beginning of the conquest. You come into this land, I've already warned you in the in the law, in the commandments through Moses and all of these things in Deuteronomy, warned you that you better fear me when you're in the land. I'm not one to be taken lightly. Right? Now, being under the new covenant, does that give us freedom to just do what we want and live how we want? We're no longer under the Mosaic covenant where they stone people and they do those kinds of things to people who break His covenant. Do we have reason not to do? Has that reason to fear Him is gone now because we live under an unconditional covenant where we're saved regardless of the way we live? No. We still have a holy God, and we still have a God who chastens His people. We still have a God who corrects His people. The Bible says there's a sin unto death, that we can actually violate God's standards to the point, even as believers, to the point He takes people out. It says that in 1 Corinthians that there were people that were asleep, or sick and even asleep, meaning they were already dead because of the fact they were taking the Lord's table in an unworthy manner. They were violating what happens at the Lord's table. The spirit and the way they were approaching that whole thing, God says, I'm just going to judge you for it. You say, well, I don't see that happen all the time. No, because God's a patient God. But it does still happen. Right? And so this is meant for us to really kind of be that. You go look at that mound, it's meant to say, this is the way God thinks about sin among His own people. We're not even talking about foreign nations. We're talking about His own people. This is the way this is how serious He is. Okay? And besides that, Achan's sin did not bring punishment just upon Achan. It brought upon the whole nation. 36 men died because of Achan. That makes sense? That itself adds more guilt to Achan and his family for what they did. Okay? All right, now I want to go on. Yes, sir.
Verse
25.
chapter 8. And so it was that all that fell that day, both men and women, were 12,000, even all the men of Ai. He killed the women.
Yeah, we're not there yet. We have chapter 7.
But would the women have been carrying swords?
No, we're not. Yeah, that's what we talked about in the commandment, that He said, spare nothing that breathes. There's no taking anybody. All right. Let's jump ahead to chapter 10, but let me give you some background of what happens in chapter 8 and chapter 9 that goes on. Chapter 8, we see God giving battle plans to conquer Ai, like He gave battle plans to conquer Jericho. And chapter 9 introduces us to the Gibeonites. The Gibeonites are Canaanites that trick Israel. Once again, Joshua should have sought God's counsel before he made a decision. But they trick basically Joshua. They say, oh, we're from a land that's very far away. And we fear the God that you fear. And we want to come and be part of your group. And they brought this moldy bread, saying, yeah, it was actually fresh when we left, but now it's moldy because it took us all this time to get here. And really, what's happened here is they're Canaanites that have basically seen the handwriting on the wall, that every city's falling, and we don't want to be the next one. So let's make an allegiance with them. And Joshua, not having sought the mind of the Lord about what he should have done here, gives them the right hand of fellowship, covenants to them that we will be with you, and then it comes out that they were Canaanites. So what does he do with them? He puts them into servitude. They are perpetual servants, but because they made an oath to them, they are forced to keep that promise. And by the way, when we get all the way even to the time of Saul, the king of Israel, the first king of Israel, he goes after the Gibeonites. And guess what God does with the line through David? He goes after the family of Saul for attacking the Gibeonites because of the promise Joshua makes to the Gibeonites. That's how much God expects you to keep your word. So, isn't that an amazing thing? God holds people to their promises. All right? So, chapter 10, now we have the subjugated Gibeonites, and Joshua's making them to basically chop wood, carry water for the Israelites, all the kinds of things that you would basically expect in servitude. They've made this treaty, and now there's this group of people that are mad at the Gibeonites because you joined hands with our enemies, and now they're going to make war with the Gibeonites. And the Gibeonites send a message to Joshua and say, we need your help. So now instead of fighting against the Gibeonites and fighting against all these people, now they're protecting the very people they were told by God originally to have no mercy on. All right, so go to chapter 10, look at verse number 5 through 15. So we need to do 5 through 10, and then 11 through 15. 5 through 10, shy, 11 through 15. 11 through 15, all right. Okay, before you go on, what does discomfited mean? It's another one of those words that we may not be familiar with. What would you say? Scared him? The word means confuse or confound. He shook them up, basically, in such a way that they didn't realize what's going on, or they couldn't perceive, they couldn't think straightly. Okay? Yeah, he did ask. God gave him some wisdom on this one. All right, 11 through 15. All right, so we got a majorly different thing happen here. So, did the Gibeonites think they could defend themselves? Yes or no? No. So why? So what do? Call on Joshua. Took his troops, his army to defense. And how much of the army goes with Joshua to Gibeon? It says all the people of war. Now, you remember I told you last week that it's 603,000 is the measurement that's given, or the measurement, the amount that's given to us. And then it says, in the mighty men of valor. The men of war would be a reference to the standard troops, people ready to fight. Mighty men of valor would be special forces, people who do excellent work in fighting. You understand? You know, it's the difference between Green Berets and the army, right? Okay, they went with him. How did God participate in the battle? We talked about discomfiting. What does that mean? He discomfited them. He brought confusion, brought panic, brought strain. And then another thing, as they're running, what happens? Hailstones. Hailstones, big enough to kill them. This is unique. Now, is this the first time God has brought hailstones upon something? Go back a few years back, and you'll remember He did it with Egypt too, didn't He? And the hailstones were big enough to kill the cattle and destroy the crops. Okay, so that's happening. Is this natural, what we're watching here? Is this a natural event? Everything up to this point is supernatural. So can we explain it in some kind of scientific means? No. Okay. Then the most supernatural of them all. Joshua says, sun, stand still. And moon, don't move. And what happens? It stood still, and the moon stood still. Now, I just want you to think about that. We understand, I said, you know, I told you that word, the phenomenological word. The word means as it appears. We know the sun isn't moving, at least not in the sense of it moving, that why it goes around. It's not the sun moving around the earth, it's the earth revolving, and we see the sun as the earth revolves. I don't know exactly how to explain what exactly happened here, except I'm thinking the entire earth stopped moving. I want you to think about this. What is on the earth that's spinning with the earth? The oceans. You stop spinning something that's going 800 miles an hour, what happens to it? The inertia of it all keeps moving. And what's the water going to do? You ever take a cup of water and you go like this and you slide it across the table and then suddenly stop it? What happens to the water on the inside? It goes, it splashes out over. So this was more than just stopping the earth from spinning. This was something. But do we have trouble believing that God can do this kind of stuff? If He could create, speak, and it comes into existence, I don't think I have any trouble believing that He could do something like this. If He could make the Red Seas split open and it's dry land under, I don't have trouble believing He can do anything. If He can do that with a Jordan, I don't have any trouble believing He can do it. Can I explain it scientifically? No, because it's not scientific. This is miraculous. You know what? The very idea of being something miraculous is that it violates the laws of science. And by the way, the laws of science are just something men have discovered. They're not something that men have made. And I think what you would say, the laws of science are basically the way in which God works and governs the world. But every once in a while, He decides to change the way He works. And He's allowed to do that because He is who? God. Okay? All right, so let me give you a couple worksheets. I need this one right here. The NASA computers proved Joshua's long day. This one I'm going to ask for you to take and you read it on your own. It's a good article. I've enjoyed it. It's a good article to explain some things that we'll talk about here in just a moment. And then this one we're going to work on here, and this is really just a matter of question and answer. Darla, can you pass that part out? TJ, if you'll pass this part out. Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to go over the that didn't happen part. Tonight, I'm going to expect you to give me your verbal report on that article. You tell me what you think. Thanks. Written by Danny Faulkner. If you are familiar with the Answers in Genesis, Danny Faulkner is the guy who does all the science for the astronomy and those kinds of things. So he actually wrote that article. That's a good article. All right. Look at our little worksheet here that we have. It says, many people are skeptical of the miraculous events recorded in Scripture. If they rattled off a list of the passages they doubt, the sun standing still would likely be among them. How would you answer some of these claims? Now, I'm going to let you answer them, but I'm going to give you my answer as well after you're done answering, okay? So you can see it. Number one, the sun can't stand still. The earth would have to stop rotating and the moon stop revolving. Anybody got an answer to that? Okay, she said the sun doesn't move. The ocean's gathered up as a heap. Okay, to hold in place. Or God moved the sun. You know, I also got to thinking, maybe it was only meant for Joshua to see all of this. And somehow it was only a vision, you know. But it says it's recorded in another book, which is sort of a way of saying it wasn't just Joshua that saw it. It might have been seen by a bunch of other people. Jasher, we don't know who Jasher is. Jasher is. All right, so let me read you the note here that I've got. It says, this is a true statement, but the text is using phenomenological language to describe how it appeared to those on the earth. The sun appeared to stand still as the earth stopped rotating. If the passage is rejected on these grounds, then they must also reject the weatherman's forecast when he tells them the timing of the sunrise tomorrow. So obviously they say it's not based on... This is obviously phenomenological language, which is a way of saying the sun did not stand still. The earth stopped rotating. Just kind of the way of describing it. Okay? 2, if the earth had suddenly stopped rotating, the oceans would have swept over the continents. Anybody got any thoughts on that one? I just heard Wayne's. The ocean stood still up in a heap? Maybe. You know, the Bible doesn't tell us. Yeah, go ahead. Hush. Jesus has been able to do that, hasn't he? Peace, be still. He calmed the storms and they went hush. Yeah, I mean, that's a good illustration. I didn't even think about that one, but he did do that, didn't he? In the middle of a storm, calmed the winds and the waves. Yeah. So here, let me read you this. This is a true statement. If the earth stopped suddenly, the inertial energy of the water in the oceans would cause them to flood on the west coast. You could demonstrate this by sliding a glass of water across the table, suddenly stopping the glass. The water will continue moving as the glass stops. There are 2 possible answers to this objection. God could have gradually slowed the rotation of the earth to avoid the issue. If God has the power to stop the earth from rotating, He also has the power to stop water simultaneously. That would be Darla's answer there. The text gives no indication of how fast the sun stopped moving in the sky. Both are made of the matter He created, and He is the master of both. Either way, there is a biblical explanation. Okay. 3. Or your third dot there. It was just a solar eclipse that made it cooler for them to fight and finish the battle, which I don't even understand that. I don't understand it here. So I don't even know why they put that in here, but I'll read their answer. While there may be several ways to respond, the first is that the text doesn't say that it got darker. It says that the sun stood still in the sky. You can't just make something up to explain what you consider to be an error. Also, eclipses last no more than a few hours, so it cannot explain how the sun stood still in the sky for a whole day, whether that means 12 hours or 24 hours. Huh? Yeah, it would hide the sun, not give you light. Yeah, I don't get the purpose of that even statement. It's a reverse eclipse, yeah. Okay. It's just a myth in the book of the Bronze Age goat herders. Okay, so let's look at that one for a minute. Anybody got an idea on that one before I read you the answer they have? For young believers? Okay. Unbelievers, okay. Okay, first off here, this explanation has problems on several levels. First, the source of a statement does not make the statement false. Second, it also shows chronological snobbery, assuming that we are so much smarter than those in the past who would believe anything they heard. It also is just a dismissal of the claim of the miracle, not a real argument. It doesn't provide an explanation of why it is false. And I'm assuming they're just giving these arguments that they've heard people give. If you ever go on their website, Answers in Genesis website, and read, they have that all the time. People that are bringing up basically skeptical arguments, and they answer them. They take the time. That's why they call themselves Answers in Genesis. They work at trying to answer the Scriptures and answer the skeptics, basically, on things like that. Last one. Miracles like that can't be proven by science, so I don't believe them. Okay? What'd you say? I don't believe science. Science has gotten wrong things. You know, at one time, science believed that if you bleed people, that's going to solve the problem for your health issues, right? That's how they said Abraham Lincoln, or George Washington, died, right? They bled him so much that he ended up dying prematurely. If they hadn't bled him, he'd still be alive. So, science always been right? No. Yeah. Okay, here you go. This response exposes the bias of a skeptic, but it does not really counter the claim. Science isn't the arbiter of all truth claims. In honesty, the skeptic must admit that the scientific method cannot really test the claims of many miracles. And even if it did, the skeptic would likely claim there is a natural explanation that just hasn't been discovered yet. Like the resurrection of Jesus, there's a natural explanation for why he rose. Why he after being crucified and stabbed in the side and all that, but there's an explanation for why he's alive. Yeah. And it does come out of the heart of a man who wants to basically defy God. That's really, okay, I know we've said it over and over and over, and you all have gone with it and understood it multiple times. Skepticism is not a product of lack of information. It's simply a heart issue. It's not I need enough evidence. It's just a heart matter is what it is. Okay? Now, I do challenge you to read this article. It will be something worth reading. I promise you, it's not hard to understand. It's a good article. Read it, and maybe tonight you can tell me what you thought about it. All right. Let's finish out with some 5 questions, and then we're done for tonight, for this morning, or this part at least. All right. Number 1. What was a key idea or helpful point you discovered or were reminded of as we read these passages today? This is your opinion point. Yep. God is all powerful. Sure saw that one, didn't we? Okay. What else? We're all sinners, okay? He will judge the sin of His own people. Yeah, so that should cause us to say, hey, I better be careful on my own, right? You know, I don't want to be guilty for one, bringing sin in my own family that destroys my own family. But I don't want to do it to my church either. You know, and I know we can. Individually bring things into a church that can hurt a church. Right? You know, I know this is maybe extreme, but when I was in Bible college, there was this reporting going on for a while in Oklahoma that there's this continual bank robbing going on. This guy would pull up in the car at the teller, hold the gun up at the teller and say, give me all the money, and then he just kind of continually do it with different banks throughout Oklahoma City. And that was happening for a while. One of the people that I went to school with was one of them that got robbed. He was a bank teller, and he actually got robbed twice by the same guy. And he told me, he said, next time they come and do it after the first one, I'm going to hit that buzzer. And the next time they came, he didn't hit it again because he was so afraid with the gun pulled on him. But you know who that turned out to be? A pastor of a church, of a Baptist church that we were connected to as a church. And that destroyed the church. And at that time, we had a missionary that came off the field of Venezuela that his wife got really sick, didn't know what to do, couldn't stay where they were at, and he didn't know what to do. And he said, I'm called to be in the ministry, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And he came to Southwest, the church that I'm from. And that event was playing out at that point, and they discovered who it was, and so he took the church. And they renamed it. But it hurt that church, hurt that reputation. That town had a hard time believing anymore in that church. So, yep, sin can hurt a church. Number 2, stop and think for a moment about how much power would be required for you to stop a car or a train. Now think about stopping the entire earth from spinning. How does this help you understand your God more fully? I think David said it pretty good, but what is it? He's all-powerful. There's nothing He cannot do. Omnipotent. You know, I think we know that word and we understand that, but it's hard for us sometimes to embrace that thought, that He can do anything. But we just have to keep being reminded, go back to the creation. You have a hard time believing He can do all these things? Go back to the creation itself. That'll tell you where power is, what kind of power this God has. Yeah, in 6 days, huh? He created time too. Yes, He did. Number 3, what challenges do you face when you are presented with the skeptical questions about the Bible's miracles? Do you get confused, nervous, impatient, etc.? How many people get challenged on these things very often? No one's ever asked you? Yeah, you probably aren't going too much unless you're really discussing these issues, which, you know what, it might be a good opportunity to bring these up to people that you meet. You know, I mean, you don't have to, but it's a good opportunity to challenge people to think. Yep. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So his wasn't a matter of evidence. His was a matter of anger and hatred. Yeah. All right, number 4. The prayer of Joshua is often used by teachers to encourage Christians to pray for bold and audacious things. Some say that God would only answer audacious prayers. When reading the Bible, we must realize that some things are descriptive, describing what happened, while other things are prescriptive, giving us guidance on how to do it today. In this prayer of Joshua, is it an example of a descriptive passage or a prescriptive passage? Is it describing what he did, or is it telling us how to pray? You think both? It sets the model for how to pray? Sun, stand still. Moon, stop moving. When's the last time you prayed that prayer? That you can pray that way. You can ask God for impossible things. Yes, you can. Yeah. So here's another thought here. It is a descriptive passage for the most part. It tells us what he did. It's not telling us how to pray. There are other passages that we actually looked at where Joshua was praying, and no one bothers to tell you that this is the way you should pray. Like fall on your face and say, God, what's wrong? I mean, we read that one recently as well. The point is that we should pray in faith. We can trust God to do anything. Anything. And that's the idea that we need to be careful about. Now, there are passages that actually are what we would call didactic or prescriptive, teaching you how to pray. You know, we saw that in Matthew chapter 6. When you pray, this is what you say. Jesus actually specifically gives you an outline of how your prayer should look like. Or we see it in the book of James, some examples of how to pray in faith and those kinds of things. So those are important. Number 5, last one. I know we're going a little late here. Joshua's other prayer was one of lament and recognizing sin. Why do we tend to focus on the son stand still prayer rather than the admission of sin and seeking God in that trouble? I think I just sort of answered that already, but why do we do that? That one's not near as popular, right? The ones that are really amazing are the ones that are popular, the ones that are, oh, you're bad, I'm bad, I have to admit I'm bad. Yeah, those aren't so popular among sinful people, are they? Yeah, no one wants to admit they're wrong. All right, well, let's go ahead and close in prayer, and we are done for this morning for Sunday school. David, if you can close us in prayer, please.